I never thought a late-night signing gig at the tiny cafe in downtown Chicago would change my life. The room smelled of espresso and worn leather, the faint hum of the city drifting through the cracked windows. I was only there because I needed the extra cash, tips from a crowd who barely knew my name. She sat in the corner, headphones clutched around her neck, her eyes locked on mine as I signed every word of the song I sang. She didn't speak, didn't react out loud, but her gaze held me like a spotlight. There was a stillness about her that made the chatter around her fade into nothing. I couldn't stop glancing her way, my hands trembling with both the performance and the pull I felt toward her. I noticed the way she pressed her palm against her chest when the chorus swelled, like the music vibrated inside her instead of through her ears. I had never seen anyone experience a song like that. I had no idea at that moment that someone else was watching too. Someone whose presence made the air in the cafe heavier, colder, yet somehow thrilling. From the shadows near the back, a man sat alone, sharp suit, sharp eyes, and a quiet authority that made the room feel smaller. He wasn't clapping, not yet. He was studying, calculating, as if he were measuring the way I moved my fingers, how I leaned into the lyrics, how my eyes flickered toward her. I didn't know he was a widowed billionaire, a man used to controlling everything around him until later. For now, all I knew was the deaf girl in the corner, and the way her silent appreciation made my heart race. When the last note faded, she smiled, small and shy, and I almost fell over walking toward her. And from across the room, those sharp eyes followed me, unseen, but not unnoticed. Her name was Lily, though she didn't speak it aloud. She signed it slowly, deliberately, like she wanted me to remember every curve of her fingers. I nodded, smiling too wide, my chest tight with nerves I didn't understand. Her eyes flicked around the cafe nervously, and I realized she hadn't come for me alone. This was her safe space, and I was intruding. We talked in fragments, her hands dancing, my hands trying to match the rhythm, fumbling sometimes, but she didn't laugh at me. Instead, there was a patience that made the world outside melt away. I wanted to memorize every motion, every tiny twitch of her lips, every sparkle in her eyes when she laughed silently. Then I felt it. The presence again. The man in the corner had moved closer, his chair angled so he could watch us without being obvious. I caught a glimpse of his phone. Tall, broad, impeccably dressed, and very clearly someone who didn't belong in a dim, struggling cafe. His gaze burned, calculating, and for the first time I realized he wasn't just watching me, he was watching her. After our conversation ended, I walked her to the street. The night air was crisp, smelling faintly of rain and asphalt. She smiled, whispered a single word through her lips, and signed it with her hands. Thank you. I felt the billionaire's presence even then, lingering across the street, watching us disappear into the night. Something told me our story hadn't even started yet, and that whatever was coming wouldn't be ordinary. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My apartment felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself had weight. I tried to focus on my work, teaching sign language online, prepping lesson plans, but every time I glanced at my window, I imagined those sharp eyes peering from the street. And then the call came, a deep, smooth voice that made my stomach twist. "Ms. Carter," he said. I froze. How did he know my name? I think you have me confused," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "No confusion," he said, calm, controlled. "I watched you last night. The way you connect with her, it's rare. I'd like to meet you tonight at the Langham Hotel, 7 o'clock. Before I could protest, the line clicked dead. My hands shook. Part of me wanted to hang up and never look back. Another part, darker, more reckless, thrilled at the idea. When I told Lily later that day, she tilted her head, curious. Her fingers moved swiftly, asking questions I couldn't answer. I shook my head, laughed nervously. "It's nothing, just someone who wants to hire me or stalk me. Probably just weird business stuff." But I knew it wasn't that simple. The billionaire wasn't just interested in me. He had been watching her. And suddenly, The quiet girl in the cafe didn't feel so safe anymore. By the time I reached the Langham Hotel that evening, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like a drum against my ribs. The place smelled of polished marble and expensive perfume, its high ceilings echoing every footstep. I didn't belong there, not in my thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes. The concierge led me to a private lounge tucked away behind velvet curtains. It was dim, all soft gold lighting and hushed whispers. He was already there, sitting in a leather armchair like it was a throne. "Miss Carter," he said, standing as I approached. His voice was low, but carried easily. "Thank you for coming." He was taller up close, the faint silver at his temples making him look even more distinguished. His eyes, though, were sharp as glass. They flicked to my hands before settling on my face. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Ethan Hale," he said. "You may have heard the name." Of course I had. Hale Industries. The kind of money that bought buildings, entire blocks of the city. The kind of man who appeared on magazine covers with captions like "The Billionaire Who Built a Kingdom." "What do you want with me?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "Not you, not exactly, the girl, Lily." My stomach knotted. "Why?" "She reminds me of someone," he said quietly, his expression flickering. "Grief, sharp and quick, like a flash of lightning. My late wife." The room felt colder all at once. His gaze was no longer a businessman's. It was a man staring at a ghost he couldn't let go. "I want to help her," he said, "but I can't reach her. You can." I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But his eyes had that mix of power and pain that made it impossible to just walk away. I left the hotel shaking, the cool night air doing nothing to calm my racing thoughts. Lily was at the cafe again, tucked in her corner with her notebook, headphones around her neck, oblivious to the world, or maybe just choosing to ignore it. I sat across from her, my hands clumsy, heart loud. I tried to explain. My words stumbled, but my hands spoke in a careful rhythm, telling her about Ethan Hale, about the man who had been watching us, about the grief he carried for a wife she resembled. Lily's eyes widened, not with fear, but with that curious, measuring look she always wore when figuring people out. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. "Do you trust him?" I hesitated. Could I trust a billionaire with grief etched into his face, watching someone so vulnerable? Could I trust myself to know what was best for her? Before I could answer, Lily signed something else. "I want to meet him." My chest tightened. I hadn't expected that. But looking at her, the courage in her eyes, the quiet strength she carried despite the world that often ignored her, I knew it wasn't a whim. She wanted to see him. I took a deep breath, the cafe buzzing around us like an uninvited crowd. "All right," I signed back, "but I go with you, every step." Her smile was small, almost shy, but there was a spark in it that made my chest ache. For the first time, I realized that the silent girl who couldn't hear the music still had a rhythm all her own, and somehow we were both being pulled into a dance far bigger than either of us expected. The next evening, we arrived at Ethan's penthouse, a sleek tower of glass and steel that overlooked the city like it owned every street below. The elevator ride up felt impossibly long, the hum of its mechanics echoing in the silence between us. Lily held my hand lightly, her fingers warm against mine, grounding me. When the doors opened, Ethan was waiting. He stood in the soft glow of the living room, tall, immaculately dressed, hands folded loosely in front of him. His eyes softened the moment they landed on Lily, a flicker of something almost human breaking through the polished billionaire mask. "You must be Lily," he said, signing slowly, carefully, as if afraid to overwhelm her. She smiled, small and cautious, then began signing back. I watched, my heart tight, as the two of them began a silent conversation I could barely keep up with. It was strange, beautiful, like watching two old souls trying to find each other across a gulf of loss and pain. Ethan guided her gently, showing her around the penthouse, pointing to photos of his late wife, always careful, always respectful. I noticed how Lily's hand lingered on one in particular, a portrait of a smiling woman with eyes that mirrored her own. She whispered something, signed softly, and I saw Ethan's chest tighten, his jaw clenching for a fraction of a second. Then he turned to me. "I've never met anyone who could bridge this gap," he admitted. "Not before you." I swallowed, the weight of it pressing down. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about grief and connection, and the way a lost soul can find life again in someone else's hands. Lily looked at me, her fingers brushing mine again. The silent promise between us was clear. Whatever this was, it was bigger than fear. Over the next few days, our little trio settled into an uneasy rhythm. Ethan gave Lily space, but remained close, a quiet presence that made the walls between her and the world feel thinner. I watched him from the sidelines, noting the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way his laughter came slow and deliberate, as if he was testing whether joy was allowed anymore. Lily, of course, was oblivious to most of it. She explored the penthouse with wide eyes, tracing her fingers over the polished surfaces, leaning into the sunlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She signed small jokes, whispered little stories, and every time she did, Ethan's expression softened, his grief unspooling just a little. One evening, I found them in the living room, sitting side by side. Lily's hand hovered over a photograph of Ethan's late wife, and he hesitated before placing his own hand lightly over hers. The gesture was quiet, almost reverent, but the air between them shifted. The tension, the sorrow, the weight of absence, it all seemed lighter somehow. I stayed in the background, observing, knowing my role wasn't to intervene but to guide, to protect her, to make sure she didn't get lost in a world that had a way of swallowing the vulnerable whole. And yet, I couldn't ignore the pull in my chest, the unspoken connection Ethan and I were forming as well. In the quiet corners, in the shared glances and lingering touches that weren't quite noticed, a new rhythm was emerging. By the time night fell and the city lights flickered below us, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. None of us would ever leave this unchanged. It was late when Ethan invited us to the rooftop. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of rain and the distant hum of the city. Lights sparkled below like fallen stars, and for a moment the world felt impossibly large and impossibly small all at once. Lily leaned against the railing, her hair brushing her cheeks. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her eyes took in the skyline, and I knew she felt it all. The pulse of the city, the quiet ache of the past, the thrill of being seen. Ethan stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. He signed slowly, deliberately, as if testing her comfort. "I don't want to rush. I just want you to feel safe." Her hands hovered in the air, then pressed gently against his. He let her do it, didn't pull away, didn't force anything. I watched, heart tight, knowing this was a dance of trust, and she led the steps. I stayed a little behind, feeling the cool metal railing under my palms. I caught his glance, fleeting, searching. There was something in his eyes, an acknowledgement that he needed me too, that he had been lost in ways he hadn't admitted. Then Lily turned, signing one simple word that hit me like a punch. "Stay." And I realized this rooftop wasn't just a meeting of past and present. It was the moment our three lives collided, and nothing, neither grief nor fear, would ever let us go back. The days that followed were a blur of quiet discoveries. Lily began opening up in ways I hadn't thought possible, her laughter spilling into the penthouse, soft but contagious. Ethan, too, started to change. He was still controlled, still calculating, but the edges of his grief softened when she was near. I watched them, sometimes with awe, sometimes with a pang of something I couldn't name. One evening, Ethan asked me to join them for dinner. Not a formal event, just the three of us in his penthouse kitchen. The city lights poured in through the windows, and I felt the pulse of something intimate forming, a fragile bond stitched together with care, patience, and unspoken understanding. Lily signed something across the table, teasing Ethan in her own quiet way. He laughed, a genuine sound that made the room feel alive. I realized then that it wasn't just Lily who had been lonely. Ethan had been too, and in this shared space, we were all learning to breathe again. Later, when Lily had drifted off to the couch with a blanket, I stayed behind with Ethan. There was a tension between us, a mixture of desire and uncertainty. He reached for my hand, tentative, asking permission with his eyes. I gave it without a word. "You've done more than you know," he murmured. "For her, for me, for all of us." I felt something shift, a quiet acknowledgement that our lives had intertwined in ways that none of us had expected, that the lonely deaf girl had changed everything, and that the billionaire, and maybe even I, had been saved without realizing it. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything finally settled into a rhythm that felt like home. Lily was sprawled on the sofa, doodling in her notebook, humming silently along to a song only she could hear. Ethan sat beside her, his hand brushing against hers occasionally, careful and deliberate. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching them both, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. The phone rang. Ethan ignored it. The city hummed outside, but inside time slowed. Lily looked up at me, eyes bright, and signed. "Thank you." For what? I wondered, smiling back. For believing in her, for standing by her, or for letting her teach us both what it meant to truly connect. Ethan finally spoke, breaking the quiet, his voice low but steady. "We owe you more than I can say. You've bridged worlds, brought life back into this apartment, and into our hearts." I shook my head, unable to find words, but I didn't need them. The warmth in the room, the quiet laughter, the gentle touch of hands, everything spoke louder than any sentence could. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting gold across the living room, I realized that life had given me something I hadn't expected. A deaf girl who taught me to listen, a billionaire who taught me patience, and a bond between the three of us that no loneliness could break. For the first time in years, I felt completely seen, and in that moment I knew, whatever came next, we could face it together. The city outside kept moving, unstoppable and bright, but inside, we had found our quiet corner of peace, laughter, and unexpected love.